In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, Christ is born. You know, I remember when I was in Boy Scouts and even Cub Scouts before that one of the mottos that they had was, be prepared. And we always knew who was not prepared when they came out for a camp out when it was around this time of year and it was cold. And they would go out and they'd be freezing because they didn't bring the right socks or the right shoes or the right coat or sleeping bag. And it was very unique to see what people would consider preparation and being prepared for a particular event. And as we hear the epistle reading today and we hear about the words of St. Paul where he speaks about dressing up in this armor, being a soldier and having the breastplate of righteousness and the sword and the shield and the helmet and the cuffs on the hands, and we hear all this armament that St. Paul references, and he says that we have to put on the armor of God. Now, none of us in the church, I would hope not, is in here today with a bulletproof vest and metal cuffs and a helmet prepared for church and coming in to say that I am wearing the armor of God in that particular sense of the word. But as we look at the baptismal service and we look at what does the baptism service do for us, it puts on that armor of God. It washes off the old and puts on the new, and this breastplate of righteousness and this new way of walking closer to God. But so it's not the actual physical items of a soldier that we wear as Christians, but what he's talking about are the way that we move in our life, that we are prepared and ready for the struggle, for ultimately the battle against evil. I don't think there's a person here in the church that skipped every single meal yesterday. You had to have something. You ate something along the way. Maybe you even ate too much along the way yesterday. And you had something to drink yesterday, guaranteed. There's not a person in here that went all day yesterday with no water and no drink, or no food. And the reason for that is because you have this inner sense of hunger, this inner sense of a need. In fact, even when we do a particular task and it drains us, we tend to bulk up on food when we're done with that or when we're preparing to do this strenuous exercise. It's always interesting to see that runners will have like a big pasta meal before the day before they run. Does anybody run in here? I have a motto, only run when chased. But if you like to run or jog and you've done a marathon, you probably have had a high-carb diet the night before, which included pasta or whatever that would be. But you get ready and you fill yourself in expectation of that drain. And even in the midst of the race, people have water. They stop and they have the water stations, and you see people running and they drink water and they kind of toss the cup into the crowd or wherever it goes. Even with bicyclists, you see them on their bikes and they have the water and they pull the water up and they're drinking along the way because they're being drained. But we don't have that inner spiritual growling of our appetite. We just realize, unfortunately, when we're completely empty. When we're completely out of spiritual food, then we look at ourselves and we say, I hurt. I feel pain. I feel dead inside. I feel dry. I feel empty. I feel like life has no meaning, no worth. I don't understand what I'm doing. And that's when we're looking for that spiritual nourishment and it's gone. We are not prepared for the battle at hand. And we feel in ourselves not the draining of our spiritual strength, but the emptiness of our spiritual strength. So it's at that moment that we realize we have nothing. We are empty, and how do we fill that? Many times people will say, I don't feel God's presence, I feel alone, I feel sad, I feel this, I feel that, and I'm not sure that there's God. And that hunger, that spiritual starvation, now has switched from, instead of fueling ourselves, many times people will think that starvation means there is no God. and it becomes God's problem and not ours. So we fail to fuel ourselves, and we blame God for it. And we say, God has left me, God has abandoned me. And we don't look at ourselves and say, how do we fill ourselves? How do we put on this continued armament to fight the battle that's before us? The church is very clear to remind us that as we go through every day, that we are called to be prepared, to be ready, to stand and fight for the faith, and to be ready to fight off, most of all, the immediate and incessant temptations that come upon us. Everyone has them. Every day you have a temptation. Should I say this to that person? Should I do this? Should I just skip this? Should I, we are always in a process like a pinball in a machine, bouncing off one and the other. What are we going to do here in this situation at home? Then we're at work. Then we're in the car. Then we're talking with friends. And we're always hitting these temptations and these bouncing back and forth on where our life is ultimately headed. And if we are not prepared, if we're not ready for that spiritual battle, that's when we fail. So the church calls us every day to be ready, to go out and to be ready for the day. As you leave for your day in the morning, you might not have a big breakfast, you might have a big breakfast, but I guarantee if you're an adult, there's one thing in your day that you probably don't skip on your day, and that is that nice hot brown liquid that everybody brews, right? I've seen people, I can't do anything until I have my first cup of coffee, right? And it's, okay, now we can talk, right? Now you have the first cup of coffee or whatever. You see people walking into Starbucks and they look like they're half dead. They walk out and they're like, they're standing upright again, right? So we prepare for our day with coffee makers. But are we preparing for our spiritual day with prayers? Are we preparing and asking God for help to endure and to overcome the temptations and the encounters that we will have in the day? Or do we just walk out the door with nothing? How many of you would actually leave your house without brushing your teeth, without cleaning yourself, without coffee, without food, and say, I have a nice 10-hour day today, and I'm just going to go out and deal with the day? You wouldn't do that. You prepare yourself for your day in so many ways. The way you look, the way you feel, what you eat, how you prepare. Are you going to bring a lunch with you? Or did you bring warm enough clothing with you? But when it comes to the spiritual battles, which are the most difficult ones that we have, not our hunger pains, because you can go anywhere and get that filled, but when it comes to the spiritual setbacks and the struggles, do we walk out of the house not prepared at all? So what am I saying to you today? I'm saying that St. Paul says we are in a war every day. We are called to fight the good fight, as St. Paul says. But as we fight the good fight, we can't just go onto the battlefield and expect to be victorious. Even those who join the military have to go through a basic training. And when you make it through the basic training, that is the indication that you most likely will be able to succeed when you go into true battle. But no one is ever just grabbed and tossed out onto the battlefield without any training or any preparation. So what makes us think that the most crucial battle in our life, the battle for our soul to be with God, is something that we can take lightly? You are in the right place today. You are here starting your day with prayer, with the sacraments of the church. But as you go into the evening and as you lay down, and when we are captured by the visions that pop into our heads when we're sleeping. Some of you may say, well, I don't dream of anything. Some of you might have some food with MSG, and then you dream that you have 3 heads and you have all these other things and all these terrible, or you have some bad food and you have bizarre things. That might be the food, or it might be that we're not quite prepared to lay down and to submit ourselves to the sedated and paralyzed television that we see, that sometimes the devil will show us pictures and images of things. And are we prepared for that as we lay down to see those things? And then in the morning, are we rising from our sleep to ask God for help and strength? That is the calling. What you do in the midst of that is up to you. And how you address each day and how you address each night is completely subjective. I mean, there's prayers that we can say that are designed for us, but the conversation we have to have with God has to be to ask for that help to overcome the temptation and overcome those things in our lives. And the way to do that is to put on, as St. Paul says, this armament of prayer, the armament of the sacraments, the armament of love in our hearts for God. And if we do that, we will continue to walk closer to God each and every day of our lives. Amen.